Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia. I'm Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter,
business editor and columnist Greg Jefferson,
reporter Brian Chasnoff.
We're in the middle of early voting for the Texas primary, which is happening next Tuesday, March 3rd. Want to let you all know that normally we record the podcast Mondays, and usually you all get to hear it on Tuesday. In this case, we're going to do it Wednesday so we can talk about the election results. I know. It's are you going to be okay with that?
I guess.
Although, I feel like we could probably just do that podcast now, though. We can knock it out.
I think I think we're going to do
pre-record it.
Yeah, and all our predictions are going to be true.
Yeah,
that's right. So obviously Bernie won the primary. Okay, I'll stop there. But so it'll probably
Marianne
be
Williamson,
who saw that
she
coming.
endorsed Bernie.
Yeah. So you'll probably be able to hear it like Wednesday afternoon or sometime around there next week. I want to also let you know that if you want to get the election information that you need for this primary, go to expressnews.com/elections, and we got everything there for you. And one big bit of political news that actually doesn't involve the Texas primary, but it will have a big impact on San Antonio politics over the next few years, concerns the latest news on Ray Saldaña, who, as most of you know, was a four-term council member representing the Southwest Side. For the past less than a year, I guess he's been the chairman of Via Metropolitan Transit. And last week, the story broke that he's going to be moving to the Washington, D.C. area, got a big new job, and it's going to take him away from San Antonio. And Greg, you did a big profile on Ray that ran over the weekend. What's going on with him?
Yeah, so he is leaving in mid-March. He'll be starting a new job at Communities in Schools, which is education nonprofit. They help at-risk students. They put social workers in schools and create, they open up all kinds of resources for kids who need it. Saldaña's been on their national board for about 2 years, so they kind of got to know him that way. The chairman of their board, CIS's board, is Elaine Wynn. Billy, if that sounds familiar from Las Vegas, she's the queen of Las Vegas.
Is she married to Steve Wynn or ex?
I think they.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I do know they both collect a lot of art, and they're both really rich. They're both billionaires. Anyway, so she called Saldaña in October, asking him, not offering him the job, but asking him to consider, throwing his name in. And actually, it took about a month for him to finally come around and say, "Yeah, this is something I'll consider."
What was his reservation, or what was?
The
move.
He was happy doing what He's the regional advocacy director for Raise Your Hand Texas, which is basically a nonprofit that focuses on the reform of public education, and it's bankrolled by Charles Butt, the chairman of HEB, one of our very few billionaires in San Antonio. So anyway, he's got a good job, and he's chairing Via, and he'd been kind of preparing himself, for that probably 3 or 4 years. So he's doing what he wants to do, and I didn't get the sense that this is something he'd really, it wasn't part of his long-term plan to go to the Washington area to lead CIS. I think, he was happy here. He's got, a 1-year-old wife. They've got themselves set up in a house, and everything was good, and this came along.
One of the political sports in San Antonio over the last 3 or 4 years, as we got toward the end of his tenure on the city council, was, what's Ray going to do next? We wondered if he was going to run for mayor in 2021, which I think he gave some thought to. I take that back, 2019.
Right.
But he also in 2018, we had a special election for a state Senate seat, the one that was vacated when Carlos Uresti had to step down. And his name popped up there. I think he did give that some thought. He was about to become a father, and I think he thought that the timing was going to be bad. It was going to be hard for him to really commit to it. So there's been a lot of speculation. Where does this leave his political career?
Well, it doesn't hurt his political prospects at all. I mean, it's this is a well-worn path for San Antonio politicians. They kind of make their name here, they go away, they earn some national media, get some kind of raise their profile, and they come back. You saw that with Henry Cisneros. I mean, not that he left in the early 70s. He was a White House fellow. He did his thing, basically under the radar. But he came back. He brought a lot of that experience back with him. And you saw with the Castro, Julian Castro. He came back after his law degree from Harvard, worked his way into a council seat, took off from there, and now he's on the national stage. And at some point, is he going to come back? Who knows? But he could very easily.
Was it when communities and schools? Obviously, they saw a lot in him that they were impressed with, and they knew about his background. Did they have any concerns about his potential political prospects?
Yeah. That was I got the feeling that they asked, very pointedly, "Hey, if you take this job, 6 months from now, are you going to come and say, you know what, I got a mayor's race in San Antonio to run?" And he thought about it, and the answer he gave to them was, "I'll leave when I feel like the job's done." That's a little fuzzy for me, but it apparently worked for them.
Yeah, could be 6 months.
No, exactly. It could be 6 months.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they agreed on some kind of time frame. But I also think that there's almost no question that he'll come back and probably run for mayor. I mean, we talk a lot about 2019 and how close he came to getting in the race. As I was reporting on the profile, I found out that it actually in 2017 he even got much closer. I mean, that was when
interesting.
I mean, you had Ivy Taylor, you had Ron Nirenberg getting into the race. She was the incumbent mayor. He was kind of the insurgent.
Yeah.
He gave it some really serious thought in 2017, decided just it wasn't the right time for him. So he's clearly, he's clearly got the mayor's office in his head. And,
and because he's been kind of a political fixture here for nearly a decade, I think we tend to forget. I mean, he's 33. Julian Castro was 34 when he got elected mayor. So there's a lot of time for him. Curious what you all think about where this leaves Villa. I guess is the talk that Hope Andrade is going to come back to the old board chair position and replace him.
It was pretty much the same day that Nelson Wolff and Ron Nirenberg came out and said, all right, Hope Andrade is our pick to lead Villa. I mean, it was that same day.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess it's the smoothest possible transition since she was there just before him.
And actually, he was when I interviewed him about a week and a half ago. We talked about that, about who his replacement might be, and he actually he was thinking about kind of pushing an existing trustee, somebody there already. He wouldn't tell me who it was. So that's totally open to speculation, but I've speculated.
And speculate we will.
Yeah.
Well, he's kind of leaving it a fraught time for Villa.
That's right. I mean, this is the time when they're trying to get more
SA campaign.
Yeah, trying to get more funding. I don't know if his departure will really have an impact on that campaign or not. I mean, I think it's kind of an open question.
I think they already have other very high profile boosters for the initiative.
Yeah.
Henry Cisneros, most prominently among them.
He didn't, I asked him how he thought that campaign was going so far. I mean, it's just obviously in its very early stages.
Right.
But, his concern is that it's, they're not really making the case for, why we really need expanded bus service. I mean, we're concentrating on advanced rapid transit because I think it seems like his view is that the consultants have gotten a hold of the campaign and they've said, look, and the people who actually ride the buses, they're not going to vote. Yeah. So we're gonna concentrate.
Give them the shiny, exciting.
Yeah,
thing.
Exactly. We're gonna call it. We used to call it bus rapid transit. Tell you what, we're going to call it advanced rapid transit. What do you think of that? And because nobody will know what it is, and they'll imagine like teleportation and like.
And who's against advancement? I mean,
Right, yeah.
against-
Maybe
right,
we should
that's
get
right.
like Jeff Arndt in here and to talk about this. you know? I mean,
Good idea. Yeah. So this is gonna be a smooth segue. I'm not. We don't do a lot of those.
As
but
always.
I was waiting for it.
Sometimes they're a little. They're a little kind
Very
of. There's kind of a
labored.
screeching.
Buses
break
to water.
sound. But we've been talking about VIA, and last week there was a council discussion about aquifer protection, the aquifer protection program, because one of the ways that VIA has been looking at trying to get additional funding is to take the 1/8 cent of sales tax money, which has been going to aquifer protection and the linear creeks programs, and try to take that and put it into VIA. But it's, as we've talked about on the podcast, it's created all kinds of controversy because people are very protective of this aquifer program. What's the latest on that? What's the new plan?
So, after months of, the mayor trying to find a new home for the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program at SAWS and facing a little bit of resistance there and facing, potentially, seeing that program sort of halved at SAWS, it's now come out that the city can take on or continue the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program, and they're looking at doing it through basically money that they already get out of SAWS. There's basically a revenue sharing agreement that the city already has from SAWS, and they're going to use that to both sort of like operate the program, a portion of that to operate the program, and then to basically finance debt that'll like pay for land acquisitions or conservation easements, which is like the majority of it. So this was a couple of weeks ago that the city's chief financial officer, Ben Gorzel, briefed the mayor on this. And, basically there's a lot of, council was overall pretty receptive to this option.
of course, it's still going to have the funding. 109
Yeah.
million.
Yeah.
109 million over 10 years is half of
Right.
what it's currently.
Because it's been
funded
about, getting about what 20 million. They've been putting roughly 20
It's
million.
about 20 million a year now. That's funded out of this fixed sort of sales tax revenue, and they're getting basically that same amount over 10 years now.
Yeah.
So,
And I was just going to say the city commissioned a study back in December 2018 that one of the major conclusions was that funding this program at half the amount is still enough to secure the city's water supply through 2070. So that was sort of a CYA study that's going to give cover to council members to say, if anyone raises the alarms about, hey, this is less funding.
And the argument, I guess, that argument has been that the city has been purchasing conservation easements in the area, the recharge zone for close to 20 years, and that they've covered a lot of that area. I guess
lot,
that's
but not even half, though.
Not even half,
And there's
yeah.
and the Edwards Aquifer Authority, for example, they're saying, hey, don't forget about the contributing zone, which stretches way north past Kerrville, to the east and west, and there's 2 million additional acres up there that are not protected, and that and the EAA is saying, well, the program should continue into the foreseeable future because you got to protect as much as you possibly can.
how much development do you think you're actually seeing up there, though?
Well, that's a good question. I drove out to Concan, which is in Uvalde County, and there's around the Frio River. There's a lot of there are a lot of new subdivisions, golf course, that type of thing. So when you think about the tourism out to some of these places, that's I guess that's different from population growth, but it's still you're seeing developments to cater to tourists.
Yeah, I guess the argument would be made by people who maybe have questioned funding this program as much as it has been would be that you've got in some cases people in some of these rural areas who might not have the plans to develop, but they're and we're basically funding in perpetuity
And
something. The prevention of something that they weren't going to do anyway.
The counter argument to that is that these people will pass away and that land will be
that's right.
inherited, and then
Yeah.
you never know what their children or their children's children are going to do with the land. They're probably less connected to the land.
That's a great point. this, as you mentioned, they're talking now about taking SAW's revenue. And last year, because there were some concerns about the budget, looking at a shortfall, they bumped up the SAW's revenue contribution to the city, which had been at 2.7% of SAW's revenue, up to 4%. And so the city council considered that necessary to be able to balance the budget. Are there any concerns that using some of this for aquifer protection is going to cause budgetary problems?
There weren't explicit concerns made about it causing any sort of further budget shortfalls, but there was a lot of consternation both at the time that this was passed in the budget, saying we're going to bump this up from 2.7 to 4%. Shirley Gonzalez was up there saying, basically, like, I wouldn't have voted for the homestead exemption if I knew we were going to pay for it this way. And last week, Clayton Perry was like, I thought we had a budget shortfall, and that's why we we were paying.
That sounds like
Perry. But now you're telling us that we can pay for it out of this, and what the city came back and said is like, look, it's only a portion of this that we're using. But I mean, he was still kind of just throwing up his arms about it.
And so basically, but just to be clear, so we're talking about that $10 million that we're talking about, kind of reprogramming for. That's where this is coming from. That's basically the difference between 2 point whatever it was and 4%.
2.7 and 4. It's 109 million over 10 years.
But I mean what's the gap? Is that the 10 million we're talking about?
The in terms of the difference between the 2.7 and the 4%.
Like, so how much extra basically the city council squeezed out of SAWs?
So I'm not sure what the actual difference is that would be going to pay for the program, because they're talking about using a sliver of the new revenue that they get from SAWs to then go and pay for debt that takes out. So you're looking at that 109 million. A good chunk of that is new debt that they're taking out.
Don't forget, there's another option still on the table for SAWs to just take over the program. And that would be funded at roughly the same amount.
Right.
But one big difference would be it would sort of reorganize the way that it's administered. It would eliminate the Conservation Advisory Board. The Edwards Aquifer Authority wouldn't be involved anymore. The Nature Conservancy and Green Spaces Alliance would no longer negotiate on behalf of the city for the land. So I think there's a lot of sort of institutional resistance to doing a sea change like that.
Is it your sense, or any of you all, I mean, do you all have the sense that the environmentalist community, the aquifer protection community, prefers this latest option that would have the city using that SAWS revenue money?
Well, the only person I've spoken to in the wake of this so far is Francine Romero, who heads up the Conservation Advisory Board, and she was saying, She seemed pretty comfortable with it.
Gotcha.
She even said, I don't even think of this as a compromise.
Of course, she has a vested interest in it going with the city, because otherwise the board would disappear.
Yeah, and she wanted all of that infrastructure to remain in place too, even though she'd previously sort of expressed sort of skepticism about messing with the funding at all.
Tell me, is it? I've wondered this from the beginning. Is there anything preventing city council from saying, you know what, this is, if everybody thinks that aquifer protection is critical to what we do at the city, why don't we just make it part of the general fund and pay for it that way? And then if you have to go and ask for a property tax rate increase, in which case you'd probably have to go, there'd probably be a rollback election.
Isn't that sort of what this is?
Yeah, that's what that is essentially.
Yeah. Not really. No, I mean, because this is passing it off to SAWS. This is not.
No. I mean, it's the revenue that SAWS shares with the city, but it's still the city taking on the.
But even then, you're talking about
no. But I'm talking about how you fund it, like how you pay for it. In this case, you're saying, okay, we're going to take money that's coming in from SAWS. I'm saying if this is important, I mean, because it's taxation one way or the other. Yeah. I mean, over time, you could wind up with rate increases, and that's taxation by another name. Yeah. Right. Or you could just be kind of intellectually honest about it and say, okay, if this is important to you, we're going to fund it through the general fund, and hey, that may mean a property tax increase.
Well, I think that the rate increase is inevitable with the increase to 4%.
Right.
So I mean that's going to happen.
It's putting more pressure on SAWS, and I think that we're looking to look at. They were probably going to have a rate increase in the near future anyway, and this will probably add to that. I think
accelerate it.
That's right, and
So the answer is no.
Yeah. But it was a good question.
Not going to happen.
It was a good
I
question.
have no idea.
No guts. No guts.
Before we wrap things up, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the races that will be on the ballot for people who are voting in next week's Democratic primary. And there's a local judge, the 386th District Court judge. That court oversees juvenile cases. And the incumbent judge who will be running for re-election in the Democratic primary is named Cecilia Trevino. And we've had some stories in the Express News, particularly in the past week, about her conduct on the bench. And I think that many of you probably read some of these stories, but I think it's worthwhile for us to talk about. She was elected in 2016 in a Democratic wave election. In the primary, she beat, I think, a more experienced opponent. And then in the general election, she ran against Laura Parker, who was a Republican who was, I think, widely admired by both Democrats and Republicans. She had been an innovator when it came to juvenile courts and dealing with the child abuse issue. And I think there was a lot of sadness, bipartisan sadness, at the courthouse when Laura Parker was voted out. Cecilia Trevino didn't have juvenile court experience, but people are capable of learning on the job. But there have been a lot of questions about her conduct, her repeated absences. We've had now two incidents, one last week in which she has tossed prosecutors out of the courthouse for unexplained conflicts of interest. And many people have looked at these cases and thought that what she considered to be a conflict of interest had something to do with the fact that either the prosecutor or the prosecutor's spouse had contributed money to her primary opponent.
I think she's perfect for the job because she's acting like a juvenile. That was a little joke, dad joke.
Yeah. But it was a good one.
Your dad.
I think it applies.
Josh isn't laughing.
She's
Not a dad.
in about 5 years, you're going to remember this joke, and you're going to.
Oh my God, that was hilarious.
She's facing a challenge from Jackie Valdez, who is currently a prosecutor, and understandably has some support from her co-workers in the district attorney's office. But apparently that has become a conflict of interest. I'm not really sure how that affects the cases or how it would
delivery
lead
of
to
justice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It if anything, you might have a question about whether the judge would be impartial because the judge would resent the fact that the prosecutor maybe favored her primary opponent. That the judge might be called into question. I don't know that the prosecutor their handling of the case would really be a problem. But any thoughts on this primary race or the judge?
I mean, Judge Trevino comes off as, and I've never followed her on a really sustained basis, haven't reported on her, but just from the outside, it's not too much to conclude that she's a deeply insecure judge, not right. Sure of her position.
Right.
She defeated Judge Parker in a wave election.
Yeah.
It could be, and she did a guest editorial soon after her election in the Express News, saying basically, "Hey, look, it's not that bad. Don't worry about it.
Right.
I'm not gonna blow up juvenile court." So obviously she felt a little antsy about coming in. She had a big shoes to fill.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 years hence, a little less than that, it's maybe that's at the root of her kicking out this assistant prosecutor. That, and I mean, we're just living in a really cruddy political environment right now.
That's
highly
right.
partisan.
Yeah.
It's politics at every level is just becoming more tribal. I mean, it's more party bound than it's ever been.
And she did not explain to this past week did not explain to the prosecutor what the reason was. Had the bailiff remove the
refusing
the
to talk
prosecutor.
to Joe Gonzalez.
Will not talk to Joe Gonzalez, district attorney. I think they would be reasonable to give him an explanation for what's going on.
She was part of the wave of women Democrat
Latina. There was
Yeah.
a big sort of Latina wave election in early 2016. You know, and you know what I think the challenge that we've always had with judicial elections is just that they're at the bottom of the ballot. People don't know very much about the candidates, and so people will look to any factor they can in making their determination. And it's not an ideal way to pick candidates for anything when you don't know very much about them. And Michelle Barrientos Vela, the former constable, was part of that same wave election. She got elected in that very same primary of 2016 and was clearly not qualified and had
Shows you
bad
the
judgment.
limits of identity politics.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so there's going to be a lot, I think, more talk, particularly in Bexar County, going forward about partisan judicial elections and whether we need to do away with them. I don't think that nonpartisan elections for judges would solve all our problems, but it might get a better outcome than what we're getting.
Yeah, I mean, this shows you the kind of result you're likely to get. It's sort of the dice that you're rolling in a partisan election.
Yeah. So on that cheery note, we're gonna wrap things up, and we'll be back with you next week with a Texas primary roundup. And until then, take care.